America once built machines so powerful, they had to ban them. Now, decades later, everyone regrets it.
There was a time when America didn't build cars, it built thunder. Machines born in fire, molded in rebellion, and fueled by pure insanity. They weren't meant to be tamed, they were meant to rule. But when that power became too real, too dangerous, too fast, fear took control. One by one, the most powerful muscle cars in history were silenced, banned by NASCAR, blacklisted by insurers, and erased from the streets they once dominated. But why? What made them so terrifying that even the system that created them had to shut them down? Were they truly dangerous, or just too far ahead of their time? Today, we're opening the garage doors of history to reveal the legends they tried to hide. So buckle up, because by the time this story ends, you'll understand why these cars weren't just banned, they were betrayed. If you love raw power, forgotten history, and the sound of untamed engines, don't blink, don't skip, and don't miss a second, because what you're about to see is forbidden power. Car number 1, 1969 Dodge Charger Daytona, the aero warrior America couldn't handle. In the summer of 1969, Dodge decided to do something no one else dared, build a car that could cheat the wind itself. The Dodge Charger Daytona wasn't created in a design studio with polished marketing slogans or flashy showrooms in mind. It was born in the dim light of Chrysler's engineering labs, out of frustration and pride. The brand had been getting beaten badly on NASCAR tracks by Ford's sleek Torino Talladega and Mercury Cyclone spoiler. Dodge's racing pride was on the line, and the engineers wanted revenge, not with words, but with a machine that would terrify the competition before it even started its engine. The Daytona began life as a standard Charger, but what rolled out of the factory looked like something from another planet. The car's nose was stretched nearly 19 inches, crafted into a sharp, wind-piercing cone. Its rear was crowned by a massive 23-inch tall wing that towered above the trunk. Not a styling gimmick, but a scientifically tuned airfoil designed to keep the car glued to the track at over 180 miles per hour. Every inch of that body was built with a single purpose: to turn air resistance into a weapon. It wasn't beauty Chrysler was chasing, it was victory. Under that long hood sat the crown jewel, the 426 Hemi V8. The 426 Hemi V8, nicknamed the Elephant for its sheer size and strength, this 7.0-liter monster produced a conservative 425 horsepower on paper, but insiders knew it made far more when unleashed on the track. With its deep, thunderous roar, it sounded like a war cry echoing across the superspeedways. Drivers who sat behind the wheel didn't just feel the power, they wrestled it. It was raw, mechanical violence refined into speed. When the Daytona made its competitive debut, it didn't just perform, it dominated. On March 24, 1970, at Talladega Superspeedway, driver Buddy Baker pushed the Charger Daytona past 200 miles per hour, the first time any NASCAR vehicle had ever crossed that sacred barrier. The crowd went silent for a heartbeat, before erupting into disbelief. The machine looked unworldly as it tore down the straightaway, its massive wings slicing through air that had humbled every car before it. The Charger had done what many thought was impossible. It broke the sound of reason. NASCAR officials, however, weren't celebrating. They were worried. The Daytona wasn't just faster, it was too fast. At 200 miles an hour, a small error could mean catastrophe. The car's aero efficiency was so advanced that no competitor could come close. Plymouth soon followed with the Superbird, a sibling born from the same aerodynamic obsession, and together they became unstoppable. NASCAR's stock car racing, once a thrilling contest of drivers and brands, had turned into a war of wind tunnels and mathematical precision. The governing body realized something chilling: if this continued, cars might soon go faster than any track or safety barrier could handle. By 1971, NASCAR had seen enough. The rulebook was rewritten to outlaw aero warriors like the Daytona and Superbird. New restrictions on engine displacement, body modifications, and aerodynamics effectively killed the project overnight. Dodge had built a masterpiece so potent that it forced the sport to change its rules just to slow it down. The Charger Daytona, the very symbol of innovation, had been banned for being too successful. When the dust settled, the Daytona became a ghost of its own legend. On the streets, it stood out like a spaceship among sedans, its tall rear wing and needle-nose design misunderstood by most. Many dealers couldn't even sell them. Americans weren't ready for a car that looked more like a fighter jet than a muscle machine. But those who understood it knew they were witnessing something rare, the The moment when engineering reached beyond style, beyond comfort, and tapped directly into fearless ambition. The Charger Daytona wasn't banned because it failed to perform. It was banned because it outperformed everything else. It was a glimpse into a future too dangerous for its own time, when speed and science fused into something unstoppable. Even today, more than 5 decades later, the Daytona's silhouette commands reverence. It stands as a monument to what happens when passion meets physics and rules become irrelevant. Every inch of that long nose, every bolt on that towering wing tells a story of rebellion, of men who wanted to see how far they could go before someone told them to stop. In the end, the Charger Daytona became more than a racing car. It became a statement. A statement that true power doesn't always survive, but it's never forgotten. Its roar still echoes in the memories of those who saw it run, a reminder that once in a golden age of muscle and madness, Dodge dared to go beyond the limit and paid for it with immortality. Car number 2, 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS 454 LS6, the street-legal monster America tried to silence. There are muscle cars, and then there's the 1970 Chevelle SS 454 LS6, a machine that didn't just push the limits, it crushed them beneath its tires. In an era when horsepower was the language of pride, Chevrolet spoke louder than anyone. But when the Chevelle LS6 roared to life, it spoke in thunder. It wasn't built for comfort, luxury, or restraint. It was built for domination. And for a brief shining moment, it became the most feared car on American streets. The late 1960s had seen Detroit's horsepower wars spiral out of control. Every brand, Ford, Dodge, Pontiac, Oldsmobile, was chasing bigger engines and bolder numbers. But Chevrolet was quietly working on something monstrous. Their engineers knew that 400 horsepower wasn't enough anymore. They needed an engine so powerful it would make the others tremble. What they created was the LS6, a 454 cubic inch, 7.4-liter V8 that redefined what street legal meant. Officially rated at 450 horsepower, it was the most powerful production engine of its time. Unofficially, mechanics whispered that it made closer to 500. The LS6 Chevelle wasn't just a car, it was a statement of mechanical excess. Its deep rumble shook the ground. The moment you twisted the key, it felt like the air changed around you. There was no subtlety, no hesitation. The Chevelle's 4-barrel Holley carburetor sucked in air with the hunger of a wild animal. Its solid lifter camshaft, forged crankshaft, and high-compression pistons made it a street machine that could run a quarter-mile in just over 13 seconds, a figure that terrified insurance agents and thrilled anyone reckless enough to try. But here's the thing about power. It attracts fear. By 1970, the golden age of muscle was already showing cracks. America was changing. Gas prices were rising, emission laws were tightening, and the open road was no longer a playground. More importantly, insurance companies had grown wary of these beasts prowling suburban streets. The Chevelle SS 454 LS6 was the tipping point. With its incredible horsepower and dangerous reputation, insurers labeled it too risky for public roads. Premiums skyrocketed overnight, often doubling or tripling for LS6 owners. Young drivers who dreamed of owning one soon realized they couldn't afford to insure it. Dealers started seeing cars sit unsold, despite the allure of their raw power. The LS6 had become a victim of its own success, a car so extreme that the system simply refused to support it. Chevrolet had built a masterpiece, but the world wasn't ready for it. Underneath its intimidating power was an elegance that few cars ever captured again. The 1970 Chevelle's design was muscular yet refined, a wide, aggressive stance with twin racing stripes that screamed speed even while standing still. Its cowl induction hood wasn't just for show, it actively fed cold air to the hungry V8, adding more power every time the driver pushed the throttle. Inside, it was minimalistic, no fancy trim or high-end luxury, just a cockpit built for control and speed. The driver's seat sat low, the shifter firm in hand, as if the car demanded respect before unleashing its fury. The first time most people saw an LS6 in action, they couldn't believe it was street legal. It would tear down the drag strip, leaving tire smoke thick as fog, its thunderous roar echoing long after it disappeared from sight. There was nothing gentle about it. It was brutal, pure, and unapologetically American. The Chevelle wasn't trying to impress the government, the press, or the critics. It existed for one reason: to be the king of the road, no matter the cost. But that cost came quickly. As the 1970s unfolded, new safety regulations and emissions standards began strangling the muscle car industry. The LS6, with its sky-high compression and raw emissions, couldn't survive the new era. It became a one-year wonder, the final scream before silence. By 1971, Chevrolet was forced to detune its engines, and the once mighty 454 lost its bite. The LS6 disappeared as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind a trail of legends and broken records. Today, collectors see the 1970 Chevelle SS 454 LS6 as the last true warrior of the golden muscle era, the car that stood tall while the world around it began to crumble. Only a few thousand were ever built, and far fewer survive in original condition. Those who've driven one say it's an experience unlike any other, raw, intimidating, yet strangely emotional. It reminds you of a time when cars weren't designed by committees or computers, but by men chasing an idea, absolute power. The LS6 Chevelle didn't get banned by racing leagues or outlawed by the government. It was banned by fear. Fear of its power, fear of its danger, and fear of what it represented, freedom without restraint. It was a car that challenged authority simply by existing. And in the end, that's why it was silenced. But legends never die. The roar of that 454 still echoes through car shows, drag strips, and the memories of those who remember what real muscle felt like. It wasn't just a car, it was America's heartbeat before the rules changed. The Chevelle SS 454 LS6 stands today as proof that, once upon a time, Chevrolet dared to build something the world wasn't ready to handle. It was too fast, too loud, and too free. And that's exactly why it was unforgettable. Car number 3, 1971 Plymouth Hemi Cuda, the banned beast that ended the muscle era. By 1971, the golden age of American muscle was gasping its last breath. The streets that once roared with thunderous V8s were starting to go quiet. Government regulations, insurance crackdowns, and a looming oil crisis had turned horsepower into a liability. Yet in the midst of all that change, one car dared to defy it all. The 1971 Plymouth Hemi Cuda. It wasn't just a car, it was a declaration of rebellion. Born in an age of tightening rules, it stood as one of the last pure expressions of unfiltered American power, and it was so wild, so dangerous, that it was practically banned by reality itself. The Cuda had always been Plymouth's street brawler, the blue-collar hero of the muscle world. But the 1971 model, especially with the 426 Hemi under its hood, was something else entirely. The Hemi wasn't just an engine, it was a legend, a name whispered with reverence and fear. At 426 cubic inches and roughly 425 horsepower, the Hemi was the same beast that had conquered drag strips and NASCAR tracks in the late 60s. But this time, Plymouth had dropped it into a smaller, lighter, more aggressive body. The result was something that didn't just perform, it intimidated. When you heard that deep, throaty idle, it felt like the ground trembled beneath you. The car didn't invite you to drive it, it dared you to try. The 1971 model year gave the Cuda a look that matched its attitude. A low, wide, almost predatory stance with quad headlights set deep into an aggressive grille and fender vents that looked like scars from past battles. It was muscular yet menacing, a car that seemed aware of its own power. Every curve of the body was sculpted for dominance. Every inch of chrome glinted like a warning. The shaker hood scoop, mounted directly atop the Hemi engine, wasn't a styling gimmick. It was a breathing organ for the monster within, gulping down air every time the driver pressed the throttle, the hood trembling with each growl of the V8. But for all its beauty and engineering, the Hemi Cuda was born into the wrong time. The muscle car world that had thrived on speed and excess was being strangled by rising insurance rates and new emission standards. The government had started cracking down on cars that guzzled fuel and spewed raw exhaust, and the 426 Hemi was public enemy number one. Insurance companies labeled it high risk, making it nearly impossible for the average enthusiast to afford coverage. Dealers struggled to sell them. The few who did manage to buy one knew they were driving something rare, something that wouldn't exist much longer. Performance-wise, the Hemi Cuda was terrifyingly capable. A well-driven one could rocket from 0 to 60 in just over 5 seconds, numbers that rivaled some of the best European sports cars of the time. But it wasn't just about speed. The way it delivered that power was brutal and untamed. With its solid lifter cam, dual Carter 4-barrel carburetors, and nearly 500 pound-feet of torque, the car demanded full control and total respect. A twitch of the throttle could send the rear tires screaming, painting black stripes across the pavement. The Hemi didn't ask permission, it took command, and yet, that very dominance became its downfall. The federal government's new emissions standards for 1972 spelled doom for high-compression engines like the Hemi. Plymouth couldn't make it compliant without gutting its soul. Combine that with an insurance system that treated it like a liability, and fuel prices that were creeping skyward, and the Hemi Cuda's fate was sealed. Only 11 Hemi Cuda convertibles were built in 1971, making them some of the rarest and most valuable muscle cars in history today. At the time, they were just unsellable monsters, too fast for their own good, too expensive to insure, and too rebellious for a nation growing cautious. The tragedy of the 1971 Hemi Cuda isn't just that it was discontinued, it's what it represented. It was the final breath of an era when American automakers built cars from passion, not politics, when performance came before regulation and the open road was a symbol of freedom. By 1972, the Hemi was gone, and with it, the spirit of no-limits engineering that had defined the muscle age. What replaced it were smaller engines, softer suspensions, and stickers pretending to be speed. The Cuda became a ghost, a memory of what once was, a reminder of how quickly greatness can be outlawed. Decades later, collectors would pay millions to own one, not just because of its rarity, but because of what it stands for. A 1971 Hemi Cuda convertible, once considered unsellable, became one of the most valuable American cars ever sold at auction, fetching over $3 million. That price wasn't for performance or prestige, it was for the story of the last true muscle car, the one that roared in the face of change and refused to go quietly. The Hemi Cuda was more than steel and pistons, it was a rebellion on wheels. It represented the last stand of unfiltered horsepower, before America turned the key on the age of innocence. Every time one starts today, the sound echoes across generations, a deep, haunting rumble that says, "We were once unafraid," and maybe that's why the Hemi Cuda still matters, because it reminds us of a time when cars weren't just transportation, they were emotion, defiance and freedom cast in metal. The 1971 Plymouth Hemi Cuda wasn't banned by a rule book, it was banned by the world's fear of what it couldn't control, and in that it became something more powerful than any law could stop, a legend that refuses to die. In the end, these machines weren't just cars, they were chapters of a story America tried to erase. The Charger Daytona, the Chevelle SS 454, the Hemi Cuda, each one a symbol of what happens when passion outruns fear. They were too loud, too wild, too alive for their own time, punished not for failure, but for perfection. The rules changed, the engines went quiet, and the golden age of muscle faded into history. But legends like these never truly die. They live in every rev that echoes through a lonely highway at night, in every heart that still believes a car can have a soul. Maybe we banned them because they scared us. Maybe we silenced them because they reminded us how powerful we once were. But if you listen closely, you can still hear their ghosts. The roar of freedom, the sound of rebellion, the echo of a time when metal had meaning. If this story moved you, hit that like button, subscribe to Regal Rides, and share this video with someone who still believes cars were more than machines. Because power like this never disappears, it just waits for someone brave enough to bring it back to life.